You're listening to the Support Ed Learning Podcast, where we challenge the status quo of education and reimagine what learning should be. I'm Dr. Joe Sebestyen, and in every episode we dive into critical thinking, Bloom's taxonomy, educational innovation, and how AI is shaping the future of learning. Whether you're a teacher, parent, policymaker, or lifelong learner, you're in the right place to rethink, reshape, and revive education. All right, welcome back to the Supported Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Sebestyen. I am joined by the lovely Barbara Oakley. Barbara, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am great, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for making the time. I do want to give you a proper introduction that Ms. Barbara Oakley is a
Proper introduction.
absolutely. Yes. So you are a distinguished professor of engineering from the University of Oakland.
No, Oakland University.
Oakland University, excuse me. Don't want to get those wrong. Oakland University. Oakland University. You begun your academic path in languages, studying Russian at the Defense Language Institute after enlisting in the U.S. Army.
Yep. Yeah.
And you got a bachelor's in Slavic languages and literature from the University of Washington. You served 4 years in Germany as a signal officer, reaching the rank of captain before deciding to pursue engineering to better understand the technology. You worked with the military. You went on to earn a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering, followed by a master's in electrical and computer engineering, and a PhD in systems engineering. So you love engineering programs.
I'm a sucker for punishment.
And your roles have spanned as a Russian translator on Soviet trawlers in the Bering Sea, an instrument and controls engineer in a laser and research and development firm, and a brief stint at Ford before ultimately becoming a distinguished professor of engineering at Oakland University. So that is pretty impressive background, I'll say the least. But first and foremost, just thank you for your service. And thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
So you have had, I guess, the pleasure, the experience of seeing education at all levels, from the bachelor's programs all the way up to PhD. I guess just it spans years in that. But in terms of just your journey through learning, like why did you choose this field to begin with?
You mean the field of engineering or the field of education?
Well, I guess education became out of it, but I guess both in terms of where did that all start from to get engineering and as well as education?
Oh, well, I grew up thinking there's no way I can ever learn math. In fact, I absolutely hate it. And I remember getting called into the dean of students because I refused to pay attention during math class. I would just read. And he would take a book away that I was reading. I'd just get another one out. And I wish I had the tape of that conversation because I remember I I if I was the last person on earth, I still wouldn't ever touch mathematics. You will never make me touch it. And now, of course, I love math and I love science and I think what changed me was, I learned a language in the military. So I enlisted. I thought, well, if I can't do math, maybe I can learn a language, and I could sort of be paid for learning a language. But that learning of a language did a lot more. It also taught me how to learn because learning a language as an adult
Right.
really, it forces you to concentrate, to focus, to practice to the point of automaticity. So you don't realize it, but what you're doing is you're kind of using the brain's two major learning systems, that declarative, you know, um, system that you learn through explanations, like this is how you conjugate a verb,
Right.
and practice that uses that basal ganglia habitual automatic system so that things roll out instinctively. But then I thought, I went to get out of the military and nobody wanted to hire me with I followed my passion right into a little career box where I had a degree in Slavic languages and literature by that time, and all my friends who were and they had engineering degrees. They graduated from West Point, and they were easily able to get jobs. So now wait a minute. You know, I do like being open to new adventures and new perspectives. And there is nothing on earth that could possibly be more alien to the way I look at life than to become an engineer. So let's go for
Right.
it. And I could only take about 6 months at a time. I'd study really hard and diligently for 6 months, and then I'd go out at sea and work as a Russian translator and drink for 6 months. And and then your liver gets a little tired, and so then you go back in, and but I made it through, and got my second undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and really fell in love with the subject. What people often don't realize, they're like, you should motivate students to be excited, to fall in love. Well, actually, a lot of times you have to build some kind of structure and understanding before you can fall in love with what you're learning. So there's this intermediate or initial period where it may seem like drudgery and it's really, but if you can kind of get past that, at least in your own mind, you can start to, it's just like falling off your bike. It's not fun at first, but pretty soon you're flying along and it's kind of cool. So I guess that's, once I got into studying engineering, then it just became more and more interesting, which is
Mm.
if you had known me as a child.
So that, I mean, well, first off, being an engineer that didn't always love math is very, because it's different from the conversations we have with kids are usually being forced into, or wanting to go to engineering programs, know that math is important. But that's a very interesting take that you did not like math right off the get go, but kind of learned to like appreciate it at least, right?
Mhm.
So I guess what was the turning point when you realized that you wanted to dedicate your career to understanding how people learn?
Oh, well, I always kind of like to write books on the side. So when you are a professor who is trying to get tenure, you in engineering, you better not go around saying you like to write books on the side. So I I worked on this book for 6 years, and it was just a sort of a meditation on my sister and why she was the way she was, which was not I mean, she was kind of a quasi malevolent person who could sometimes be a good person and sometimes really not be a good person.
Hmm.
That book was called Evil Genes: Why Rome Fell, Hitler Rose, Enron Failed, and My Sister Stole My Mother's Boyfriend, which she actually did. Um, and but working on that book kind of on the side secretly uh, gave me this really interesting background in what's going on in neuroscience, what's going on in the social sciences, and so I looked really carefully, learned a lot in order to write that book. And then the question arose, well, Hitler, he wasn't a good person, but many people who followed him were good people,
Um,
genuinely. How did that happen? So that took me off on the path of studying pathologies of altruism. And I wrote I co-edited a book on pathological altruism from Oxford University Press and did an article for the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And then I kind of reached a point where I was like, I'm really sick and tired of writing about people who are not quite right. They're either pathologically altruistic or they're, maybe out and out narcissists or whatever. I'm going to go to a completely different discipline. I want to write about education. It's just filled with all these really good people doing great and good things. And little did I know that my background in researching, particularly pathological altruism, would come in very handy when I was trying to understand, the strands of what was going on in education. So, so I just kind of took a little career swerve, wrote this book called A Mind for Numbers, which I thought, that's the most boring title I could ever imagine for a book. Penguin Random House, my editor, picked this title, and I thought, oh, this is such a loser title. And, because you find who had a mind for numbers? It's always somebody being written about in their obituary. Frank had a real mind for numbers, that kind of thing. But it turns out this book has sold over 1 million copies around the world. It's just a really popular book. And the funny thing, though, was that when I wrote this book, um, there were these things called MOOCs coming out, massive open online courses. And so anyway, I had presented at the proceedings of or at the National Academy of Sciences about pathological altruism. And when I presented, the audience was like, yeah, no, you know, altruism's always good. It just always is. But my moderator kept interrupting these people who were interjecting in not the friendliest way from the audience. And he kept throwing me these softball, nice questions. And
Mhm.
it turns out the moderator was Terry Sanowski. And Terry
Mm.
goes, pathological altruism, that's really important. But there's this other area in our country that's also really important, and that's education in STEM. This is really problematic, and that needs some good people to be tackling it. And I said, "Well, Terry, it just so happens I'm writing a book about that." And he goes, "Well, can I write the foreword?" And I was just like, "Can I just die and go to heaven?" And so anyway, we also, as the book was going through the publication process, we made a course called Learning How to Learn that was kind of based off the book. And that became one of the most popular courses on, and still is one of the most popular courses on Coursera, which is a great online learning platform. And so I don't know, the rest is history. There's so much interest in this area, and it's such a fascinating area that I can't help but dive deep, more and more deeply into it.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that does that does explain the entry point to that. Let's because I'm sure you have thoughts on where this is going in terms of AI, right? Because now AI opens up a whole another universe essentially to us in terms of learning. And since you've taught so many about learning, how like obviously how to learn, but how do you see AI making that kind of personalized learning experience even more powerful?
Oh, there's so AI is a little bit like if you are working in construction and you build bridges, uh, you love dynamite because it can really help you to dig things out a lot more quickly and do things quickly. But dynamite's also really dangerous. And that's what AI is in education. It is incredibly powerful, incredibly useful, but if it's not used wisely, it's also incredibly dangerous. So, some of the great ways that it is extremely useful. I just one of my favorite ways of using AI is give me a good metaphor for whatever concept I'm trying to teach. Like if I'm trying to teach about main guard and scope in Python programming, well, what's a good metaphor? And you can get the gatekeeper of a castle, the rooms within a castle. You can also use it to help motivate. So, for example, when I was in Mongolia, the professors in the city would say, we're city folk, and we just don't know how to reach the students who are coming off of the Mongolian steppe. when we're teaching Python programming, they don't care.
Mhm.
And, what can we do? And I'm like, "Go to ChatGPT, explain about your students, and ask for good motivational ideas and also good ideas that they can connect with the concepts you're teaching." So they can connect mean, guard, and scope to things like migratory patterns and yurts and the kinds of things that are, very familiar with for students in that area. And it can help make learning not only more interesting and exciting, but also easier to grasp.
It's interesting, because it's the dichotomy of AI, because I hear it, you have something extremely powerful that can be completely personalized to the individual. But knowing what to ask, knowing what to actually seek, you have to almost come with that. Because like we're getting into like where AIs have biases and can reaffirm biases, and you actually don't know, and it obviously makes mistakes. But um, I think it's a very fine line in terms of where the developers have to go with it. So under the right, I like the analogy of dynamite. That's actually really, really good because like it's you can build the transcontinental railroad with it, or you could blow a lot of things up, hurt a lot of people. Have you used any platforms lately? What is your experience in education using any platforms?
Well, um, so I've used a number of platforms, and um, one problem I have is, and it's hard for me to identify with students sometimes, is when I'm asking a question, I don't want it to beat around the bush and say, "Well, what do you think?"
Right.
And so some of these platforms, the educational platforms, for example, being put out by Google, um, they might be good stepping stones in part for students, but students can also get really frustrated with, like, quit beating around the bush. I've been trying to figure this out. I just want to know, what is this? What's the answer to this? So I can know whether I did it right or whether my thinking is right and that sort of thing. So sometimes I think they get a little bit too enamored of themselves with the idea that we're using Socratic questioning to move our students forward. On the other hand, some Socratic questioning can actually be terrific. And I hate to sound like I'm touting Coursera, but this is something I really love about about what they're doing. They have a dialogue that once you have learned something, you can go in and have a dialogue with this coach that questions you to see whether you really learned it. And I just think that's actually a really effective. It's not the only way to verify that students might actually know the material, but it's a different way because testing, flat out testing, good is you can't get away from it. I mean, people will say, "Oh, sure you can. You just don't do it." Well, then students don't learn. But it can be a little dry to do a lot of testing like that. And
Right.
so, this kind of Socratic dialogue with coach is a great way to do things. On the other hand, I mean, I just use ChatGPT and Claude and so forth all the time because I enjoy it. I also use a website called smarterhumans.ai.
Hmm.
I'm a huge fan. I mean, to such an extent that I'm actually affiliated with the company. And what I love about it is you can upload whatever you want, and it will create these wonderful flashcards. And you're like, flashcards? But the thing is, I can upload a really good scientific study. I can press a button and it will generate all these flashcards, and I can edit or tweak with the main points of that study. I can pick out the key concepts of the study and so forth. And I just retrieval practice. using simple flashcards. People are like, oh, it's just a trivial fact. But actually, facts connect. And as Natalie Wexler has pointed out, when they stopped teaching the dates of history, because they're just simple facts, then students started thinking that Abraham Lincoln must have known Martin Luther King because, civil rights, Civil War, they're pretty much the same thing. And so those two must have been buddies. So you need a foundation of facts to really move forward with expertise in anything.
So you mentioned flashcards, and you mentioned there's a couple tools as an educator. You're obviously seeing the finished product of K through 12 learning come your way, right? And if I experience that way. So if we look at schools through a system lens, where do you see, especially with AI, where do you see the biggest opportunities for change?
In schools of education, well, the biggest impediment to change is schools of education. The biggest opportunity for change are in schools of education. And the reality is, I know people don't like to think of engineering analogies when it comes to people. But if you have, in engineering, if you have a bunch of broken pieces coming out of whatever that process, you want to go in and look at, if you're having to fix things all the time that are coming out, go back and look at how that, whatever that thing is being created, and see if you can fix what the problem is that you're having to fix long down the pipeline. The problem is that schools of education are training teachers to be using theories that are often 100 years old or more that were developed before we had any idea of how the brain works. And you'll always hear about what's right about Piaget and Dewey and Vygotsky and Montessori, but you'll never hear what they got wrong. And they got a lot of stuff wrong. Now, what the educators bear in mind that teachers themselves are awesome. Sure, are there, some problematic players here and there, but on the whole, teachers love their students and they want to do the best. It's just that they've been told that the best, how they've been taught how to do that is based on these, are really, really problematic theories that are in many cases completely wrong. In medicine, you get a theory wrong and your patient dies. In engineering, you build a bridge, you don't have your theory right, the bridge falls down. In education, you can have a theory that's dead wrong and it will sail on for decade after decade because it was that school wasn't right, or the teachers didn't quite do it right, or there's always an excuse. And so part of it is school, educators can inadvertently circle the wagons, and they don't want to hear from people like me or people who work in industry who say, there's a real problem here.
Mm.
Um, because they would like to think that only they know how to teach children. But the bottom line is, if you look around me, for example, at my wonderful colleagues in my school of engineering, 80% or more they grew up being educated in systems that, for example, still value at least some modicum of rote learning that's supposed to be terrible for you. I mean, this is like so common through the US that you have to kind of say, well, now wait a minute, maybe we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and there is something to internalizing knowledge, and we need to be requiring this. And boy, is that true in this day and age of AI.
Absolutely. Um, Rote learning, huh? So like the so do you it's interesting you picked schools of education as a higher education. Do you and you basically see that as a cycle that perpetuates the K-12 system then?
Yes.
Okay. So then what do you think needs to change how we teach teachers how to teach? Like what is that one thing that you think we're missing? If it is
So, a wonderful example is given by England. So, under the Minister of Schools in England for 10 years, the England's rankings internationally rose phenomenally. What did he do? He didn't just go in and say, we need to have knowledge based teaching, although that was part of it. He also said, let's get teachers trained outside of schools of education. Let's just bypass that system. And that's what they developed in England was a whole system of allowing teachers to learn how to become teachers, but not be inculcated with this often erroneous and deeply retrograde way of looking at how students learn that is not informed by evidence-based practices and by insight from neuroscience.
This episode is brought to you by Supported Tutoring, where we don't just help students get better grades, we help them become critical thinkers. Whether it's mastering AP exams, maximizing college applications, or building lifelong learning habits, our expert tutors focus on critical thinking, confidence, and real growth. Head to supportedtutoring.com to find the support your student deserves. And is it true? Because we work in our setting, we work with a lot of job placements. We've talked to some engineering programs, and they're not even at this point because there's so much competitiveness out there for kids to get into these top engineering programs, and they're putting less stock in that and more like we just want you to complete an engineering program because we're going to have to train you our ways anyway. We just want to see you finish one. Do you see that more of like is there any value and weight of the programs that kids are going into? Like, you see the top ranked engineering program in the country or whatever. Like is that what's learning or is it more is that what's valuable or is it more just can this kid learn?
But that is a foundational question that has often been asked. And some of the insights that have come out of research is the kids that get selected by these top programs would probably be doing great in whatever program they ended up in. They're real self starters. They're able to make things go. Um, but what I think is really important is that you don't need to go to some really high ranked, highfalutin school to be successful in the US. And that's one of our great strengths.
Mm.
Students can go just get an engineering degree from start out at a community college, start out heck by just going online in some of the great online programs. And you can learn what you need to know, and you can also be kind of I don't know, you can look at it independently. I have one young man who I sort of mentor a tiny bit by email because I don't really have a lot of time. But he was asking me, he's very interested in this subject. Could he learn it on his own? And it's, involves advanced physics concepts. And I said, well, no, not really. You want to go to some kind of university where you can but what you can do is you start studying every single possible thing you can about this field by going online, by reading books, by really learning beforehand. And then when you get to the university and when you're going through that program, you will be able to look at what you're being taught in a much more fresh and independent way. I remember when I was going through engineering, electrical engineering as a young student, every once in a while there'd be this student and they'd just be, really standouts. And they, I remember one guy, he would sit and read Agatha Christie novels during the class because he already kind of knew this stuff, but he had actually taught himself and kind of gone through and studied these materials. And so he had a much broader perspective than most of the students in the class. And we can all do that. That's what if I had known, I would have been trying to do that kind of thing as well.
Mm. So you're much more of the growth mindset philosophy then.
Oh, don't say that.
Why?
um, I much as I admired Carol Dweck, I think it's um, kind of overrated. There are some, eh, you know, it depends on what study you look at, but some
Right.
of the original studies, it's really people, let's say intelligent people have wondered about the statistical possibility of having the kinds of findings that were found. And indeed, if you go look at there's one study that was done on, I believe it was on ACT scores.
Mhm.
And you know, so you would think that high scorers on the SAT or ACT would be, well, they'd have to have a growth mindset.
Right.
Well, they don't, and so I certainly didn't really have a growth mindset. I was just kind of like, I want to flounder ahead. And a lot of great students I know, the trick is thinking that you just can't do it yet is not going to get you very far. What's going to get you far are specific ideas about what do you do when you're trying to focus and you're being distracted? What do you do when you can't figure something out? How do you tackle that problem? These are things where insights about learning can be very beneficial. And Santiago Ramon y Cajal, the father of modern neuroscience, has said like 150 years ago, we can sculpt our own mind in how we're looking at things. I mean, he was saying growth mindset a long time ago. So it is true, but we can go so much further than that with what we know now about these, I hate to call them brain hacks, but there are great hacks that you can use to help improve your ability to learn.
Right. Absolutely. And I do want to be respectful of your time. I know we in terms of start time, but you said you said you were interested in asking me some questions what or about my background. What did you want to know?
I want to know how you got into education and what do you what do you see as how education is going to unfold in the future with AI? And what part are you going to be playing?
Well, that's a three-parter. So that's okay. So
Yeah.
background education, well, like everyone, I think I like school. But I liked a lot of some of my teachers. I loved history. But I really left high school saying I never go back to school. Like I'm after I get through college, um, I actually wanted to be a movie director at one point. My parents were like, no. So like um I I went to a small school in Pennsylvania to be actually to pre-law. And I think I mean, I had a good class in my first semester, but I'm like, there's no way I want to do 7 years of this. So my roommate, my good friend from high school at the time, he loved his advisor and he was in secondary education, social studies. And I liked my history professor and I liked my history teacher. So I was like, well, I'll just do that. That sounds better. Right. So great. So I switched. Um, and had a really good experience within the history department. Like loved learning about history. Had some amazing professors. One I actually got to learn in his last year before retirement. Our dean or department chair of history, he was an expert on like Nazism and the Holocaust, and he taught my history teacher who I loved. So like it was kind of like that full circle moment. Um, and I think similarly, even though our school was known as an educational school, I left there having known nothing about how to teach. Like it's so you get so smacked in the face with it. But but it's funny because of my unique journey. So like I was able to student teach partially for a semester abroad in Budapest, Hungary, and that was awesome.
Wow.
That was a really cool experience. That like made me want to move away from Pennsylvania at the time. So I got my first job in North Carolina. But I'm pretty unique. Like I'm I guess on the younger side. I've taught and been an admin in I think 7 different systems now. Like in that short career, like I was North Carolina public, I was in a DC charter. My longest tenure for teaching was with Fairfax County Schools. Moved back to a Catholic school to teach, and then I got into admin and did private and 2 publics, and that's where I'm at today. And um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think I learned how to teach until my second and third year. My second year was behavioral management in inner city DC, like how to actually manage a classroom because I had no idea. I thought your personality could carry it. And then really, where I think I fell in love with like instructional design and teaching was teaching IB history in Fairfax my third year. Cause like I wasn't teaching history, I was teaching writing through history. And so realizing that yes, I know a lot of information and I'm very passionate, but like doesn't matter if the kids can't do anything, they can't pass these tests, they can't write it for these exams. Our pass rate when we started was like a 20%. So we literally taught structures of how to write and improved writing to about 90% pass rates. So like that was really like that's what made me really fell in love with the power of teaching. And I realized that it's not we learn by doing and telling is not teaching. So like having that experience, and then I was able to do a little adjunct work teaching other teachers, well, people that were transitioning into it. So I went the educational leadership route with my master's because I leaned on that department chair who was like, if you were my son, I would not tell you to get a master's in US history because there's going to be more jobs in education than, and he was pretty much right. I mean, as much as I love history, but God knows where I'd be with that. So got into admin. Um, I like it. Some people describe being assistant principal as the worst job in education because it's like going from the star athlete to referee. So yeah, that has been it. And then I basically COVID was definitely hard. I like building positive relationships with students, and that experience, I started tutoring again and then kind of built this company from that. So I got really good into like test prep, working for other companies, and then kind of did my own thing and kind of grown that ever since. Um, and I guess and I've really done it as a systematic way of like, it is. So I'm a little bit more, I guess, open to the growth mindset because especially when it comes to standardized testing, it's really not the smartest kids still fail. So if you're not practicing, if you're not just doing the reps, um, you're not going to be successful. Some kids can be. Some kids are naturally talented, but like really, we've taken kids who have been failing and got them to 4s and 5s on their AP exams just by like, if you could just do 4 practice tests, if you could just review, which these kids don't do on their own. Because again, we're teaching content. We're not teaching those skills that are needed. They're just there's a lot of assumptions, I think, in education of kids have these skills. They're smart kids. They have these skills. No one actually taught them how to like think, and a lot of people haven't taught them how to learn. So like everything you said, I think speaks to me. It's just I see the failures of the system producing worse and worse results. And I saw that as a teacher 12 years ago. Like these kids are getting dumber. And I was like, I mean, and I don't mean that like mean. I mean, like every year, kids knew how to write less and less. Where my first year, they could write a full essay. My last year was like, can you write a topic sentence? Like, do you know what that is and why that's important? So that's like scary, um, where we're going, because it means that they're less and less independent thinkers later and later into their educational career. Um, what I'm interested in, I guess, with to transition to the second part of your question, I think AI can revolutionize education, but I don't think it'll happen soon enough to do
Mhm.
it. I do see, not that I want it, I believe in public education, but I just see that there's going to be, with all the political stuff that's come out of COVID and just where we're at, I do see this massive privatization movement going to happen. They, to unlock those tax dollars and to basically get for the haves and the have nots, if they can dislodge that money that funds public schools and get it to privatize, I think the people who have money will have access to better schools and the ones that aren't. That's not to say public schools are bad. They're good, but like we're solving all of society's problems right now and not actually focused on what they were designed to do, teaching and learning. With that being said, teachers, like you said, it's antiquated in a lot of ways, and that there is a tool out there that can actually personalize learning for every student in your classroom.
Mhm.
And you're being asked to kind of do that with IEPs, accommodations, and those things. And we're not like, how do we figure that out? How do we do that so that, because there's going to be gaps no matter what student body you have, AI can fill those gaps and get kids to level up, if you will, and be on this. And that, I think that's truly revolutionary. And I just don't see the system of education embracing it fast enough to make a change, but I think some schools will do it. So what I'm excited, like the tools we're developing, to have like a personalized learning tutor, um, I think that will. I do. I mean, obviously we're going to try to use that for our business, but I would love to be able to give that to education, because I mean, there people are going to do it for other, but like if you actually had a tool that could tell you exactly where you are and where you need to go, um, you kind of level the playing field and you make the opportunity that any kid, we actually truly believe any kid can learn now. We actually give them the tool any kid can learn. Like you can literally give them the direction. So,
No, I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Well, I think you're off on a terrific track. It's fantastic to hear sort of the motivation behind, in which direction you're going in, and I think you are heading right into a really, really much needed area. And before we sign off, I would like to know from you, what are your top three books of history that are like, related to history that you would recommend?
okay. I gave away my copy and then I had to buy another copy. So number one is Rise to Greatness. Doris Kearns Goodwin. I love Team Arrivals, but Rise to Greatness takes the snapshot of 1862 through Lincoln and his development as a leader. And like it is so well written. It's so good in terms of just teaching you how Lincoln thought and his evolution as a strategic leader. I love Rise to Greatness. It reads very, very fast.
Okay.
I love Hamilton by Chernow is long, but in terms of like what I believe, because I think remediation is a waste of time. I think true remediation has to happen in front loading information. If kids aren't going to get the concepts, they have to hear it almost the first time or have it at a lower level before they go deeper, right? Like previewing content rather than trying to reteach bad learning. Um, I say that because I listened to the soundtrack of Hamilton before I read Hamilton the book, and there's differences in it, but it's so much. Cherno's a great writer, but I mean, when you listen to, you're like, Lin Manuel's a genius, and this book is fantastic.
Okay. And number three.
Number three, ooh, what would I? That'd be a toss-up, but I probably, I don't know. I'm a sucker for 1776 too. I think does that mean that's not Meach? He wrote Adams too. Um, it's just it's yeah, that's
Oh, yeah,
McCullough.
and who was that?
That's by McCullough.
Yeah, I read Adams. That was really good.
Yeah, 1776 is really good, and just like how how bad it how bad it was for the U.S. Army, Continental Army, the Colonials during the Revolutionary War, and how like George Washington held that together too is pretty impressive. Yeah, I mean, I am a sucker for what the reason I love the Civil War. We spent 8 weeks on it for IB because IB was you got 2 essay questions. So we knew the ins and outs of it. And it's just really, really fascinating to look at it through the eyes of leadership. We didn't spend that much time on the Revolutionary War, but I mean, there's been so many good, I guess, documentaries slash like the series Adams. If you read the book Adams, like John Adams on HBO is fantastic. But like, it's really, really good. Yeah, those are probably for history. Yes. I do like a couple other things. They're a little more controversial, but I would put maybe 4 and 5 on there is How to Hide an Empire, just about how like, even though America says it's a republic, it's actually an empire. And then if you really want to go deep into like, it's not really conspiracies, just how everything in the US since the Cold War has been driven by like profit and money. The Toll Brothers. What is it? It's not the Toll Brothers. Is it the Toll? It's not the Toll Brothers. The brothers, John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles. Let me see what the book's called. I forget now. Alan and John Foster. I think it's the book. Oh yeah, it's just called The Brothers. That's what it is. So it's literally, if you know who John Foster Dulles Airport's named after him.
Yeah.
John Foster Dulles was the Secretary of State for Eisenhower, and Alan Dulles, his brother, was the head of the CIA.
Yeah.
And
he always think that there was somebody who was a master spy within the CIA.
oh yeah,
And eventually, after Dulles died, there was. So he was right. And they always said he was just paranoid.
he was, but they definitely shaped a lot of the geopolitical situations we are in stem from a lot of their early intervention in the lens of preventing communism from spreading, like toppling democracies that were left leaning. So it's there's some great books, but you learn a lot about kind of like that area. So highly recommend.
Well, just before I go, I'll toss back to you Jack Weatherford's Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. That's my favorite book ever. So
Really?
yeah. So if
I don't have much on Genghis. I don't have much on Genghis Khan, so
yeah, this is a great way to start.
okay, awesome. All right, well,
thank you
Barbara,
so much.
thank you so much. Honor. It's been definitely a pleasure to have you. We'll hopefully connect in the soon and in the future. But good luck with everything, and thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one.
Thanks for joining us on the Supported Learning Podcast. If today's conversation inspired you, challenged you, or sparked a new perspective, be sure to subscribe and share with a fellow changemaker. We'll be back soon with more voices, more insight, and more ways to elevate the future of learning together. Until then, keep learning and keep pushing the conversation forward.